Hello, thank you for coming. So, to sum it up, when I was 22, I went to Europe for a month by myself. 7 cities, planes, trains, hostels, like a giant suitcase that weighed half of me. And I was planning to stop halfway through the month in Berlin to see my friend Patty from high school who lived there. Landed in Copenhagen. That was easy. Every person in Denmark is model level hot. And went on to Prague, where I treated all of my hangovers with crepes I would buy in carts on the street. Moved to Budapest, where I fell in love with the city for the first time. It was magical. There's a palace on a hill overlooking a broad green Danube River, and all the pastries are like 25 cents for a chocolate croissant. I was staying in a hostel and sharing my hostel room with an Australian adventurer who was going to canoe to Romania somehow. And I was like, oh, I'm inadequate compared to you. And he had a hacking, painful cough that he would just cough into the night in the room that we shared. And on my last night in Budapest, I packed because I was taking a morning train to Vienna, and when I was trying to sleep, I was freezing all night, and I kept waking up to put on more layers of clothes. I didn't think anything of it in the shower the next morning, which was a communal sort of shower room, but I happened to be all alone. I was washing, and the edges of my vision started to go black, and I was shaking and sweating, and I had to will myself to maintain consciousness because I could feel myself passing out. And I couldn't think of anything more horrific than passing out naked in a communal shower to just be found by anyone. So it was every action that morning was just like a force of my own will to keep myself awake, to move on like action through action to figure out what I needed to do to like continue on my trip that morning. And I felt stronger, and I eventually thought, oh, well, that was weird. I hope that doesn't happen again. And I pushed on to Vienna. And the only reason I wanted to go to Vienna, because I wanted to see Schloss Schönbrunn, which is the palace where Marie Antoinette grew up. As a child, I liked any story where someone got their head cut off, and I still do. And so I pilgrimaged there. And I had 48 hours in Vienna, and I was going to, I knew I just needed to rest, and eventually I would make my way to the palace and it would be fine. I booked a private room in a hostel because I had a really high fever. I didn't want to be around anyone else. And then I didn't really realize how fully fucked up my body was until I tried to take a shower again the next morning and almost passed out again. And I have a very clear memory of my eyesight going to pinpricks as I just tried to get my key in my hostel door, and I made it with just enough time to stumble in and close the door behind me before I could pass out and lose consciousness in private. Just as one does. My mental state at that moment was you're better than this. Your whole trip, your whole adventure can't be ruined because you picked up some stupid germ somewhere. If Marie Antoinette can walk up to a guillotine, then you can get out of bed. But my physical state was in a fever dream, and I had a raging headache that the couple Motrin I had couldn't take. I hadn't eaten, and I was horribly dehydrated, and I remember being okay, take your contacts out, but I couldn't even reach up into my own eyeball to take a contact out. And my parents in Michigan were very scared, but completely unhelpful because they were thousands of miles away and I was all by myself. An ambulance came to get me the next day. As was my pattern thus far, I passed out in a bathroom. And this time it was in between the toilet and the wall. And thankfully, in private, it was this sort of a toilet room that was kind of next to where all the rooms in the hostel were. and I woke up on the floor between the toilet and the wall and was like, okay, when you're ready, you can leave, but like don't push it. So just hang out here for as long as you need. But the room had motion sensor lights, so I was on the ground, covered in like this thick, mucusy, slimy sweat, and the lights would just turn off. And I, would just flail in the saddest possible way to get the lights to come back on so I wasn't also in the dark. The EMTs eventually came. Well, I found someone who could speak enough English and enough German to call an ambulance for me. I actually had to imitate what I think an ambulance sounded like, which doesn't sound the same in Austria. And so the EMTs came and they had bright red pants on, and they drove like caterpillar slow over every cobblestone street in Vienna to take me to the hospital. And they told me what my temperature was in Celsius, and I was like, what the fuck does that mean? And they were like, what the fuck is Fahrenheit? And they just like didn't care. So I don't know what my fever was. At the hospital, I got scared. No one spoke. The few people who spoke English seemed to be sort of like remembering what they learned in middle school. And like my middle school taught me sort of like, the dog runs across the road in French, not like, you're about to die from this disease. And so it was actually really scary. The nurse who hooked me up to an IV so I could have fluids, all she said was, "It is sad you are alone?" and I was like, yeah. And I cried for 2 hours. I felt like such a fucking failure because I had been in all these hostels and met all these people from all over the world, and they were just like la-di-dying it across Europe, and I couldn't even make it 2 weeks before I was patient zero in a foreign hospital. And that's how I felt, and that's how they made me feel, like I was the carrier of a brand new disease. Because none of the doctors, I made them nervous, none of them wanted to deal with me. They basically ignored me because we couldn't communicate. They didn't know what was wrong. None of my symptoms fit something that made sense to them or to me. So they just sort of like left me alone. And some of them told me I could keep going on my trip because I had another 2 weeks. But the doctor who came to check on me at night, who truly looked like Sigmund Freud, I woke up and this old man was leaning over me with glasses and a long beard, and he says, "You should go home to your mother." And I was like, Freud would make this about moms, and I don't listen to ghosts, so I don't think I'm gonna take your advice. In the morning, they brought in an English-speaking doctor specifically to deal with me because no one else wanted to. He told me I was a mystery of symptoms and that he was going to give me antibiotics even though he didn't think they would work or do anything. No one knew if I would get sick again, but he felt okay letting me leave since I was going next to Berlin where my friend Patty lived and speaks German and could help me and take care of me. This was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. It was also the best thing that's ever happened to me. I was able to, like the whole trip when you're in a foreign country, we take advantage of the fact that we can read every sign that's around us, but when you're in a foreign country, you truly don't know like where the fuck you're going or what's a pharmacy or what a hospital is called. And so I already had to rely on like my wits and a map on my phone, but when I got sick, I tapped into like an animal style survival instinct that lived somewhere inside of me that allowed me to access like a deeper level of mental and physical strength to make me push through. Literally, my force of will allowed me not to pass out naked in several communal showers, surely because I willed myself not to. And there's been so many situations in the 6 years that this happened where I've been nervous, and then I'm like, well, you're not alone in a foreign hospital, so like, how bad could this be? The adverse effect is that I am also constantly barreling into hard situations with no thought process, completely alone, and afterwards my friends are like, well, like, why didn't you ask me for help? And I'm like, oh, like, I can do that? I don't have to literally handle everything difficult all by myself, because that's like sort of how I like grew up in that couple days that I was almost dying in Austria, or not almost dying, no one knew what happened to me. I did get to see Schloss Schönbrunn, where Marie Antoinette grew up. She was beheaded in Paris. That's a mystery where that happened. But I saw where she was. The taxi that took me from the hospital to the train station happened to drive by it, and I saw it out the window of the car. So, thank you so much. Have a good rest.